welcome to yet another session of Talk the Talk. We are conducting this session in collaboration with the Ananta Center at Tata Steel Valuable. Today we have with us the CEO of Council on Energy, Environment and Water, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh. CEW is an independent policy research institution which looks into global environmental challenges and works with a host of stakeholders. Dr. Ghosh, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show. The journey of CEW has been really inspiring. In just last 3 years, this organization has been ranked as the topmost organization or as a policy think tank on climate-related issues. What motivated you to start this organization?
Well, primarily the motivation was to set up an institution in India that would work not just on Indian issues, but also have an international focus. Being an emerging power, we need to now find solutions not just for ourselves, but for the whole world, as so to speak. And we felt that there was a need to do 3 things. One, have an integrated approach to looking at energy, water, climate change, local environmental issues, and present genuine solutions. 2, to, as I mentioned, have an international outlook and not just offer an Indian perspective. And 3, to create a genuinely independent institution so that whatever we put out would not be undermined by suggestions that we were speaking for one or the other, for the government or against the government, or for industry or against industry. It's important that we now build policies that brings everyone together. Those were our key motivations.
That's amazing. Tell us a little more about the initiatives of CEW in the past 3 years.
Well, CEW is primarily what we call a research think tank. So we have to do research, we have to think, and we've got to offer solutions to our stakeholders. They could be the central government, they could be state governments, they could be stakeholders outside India as well. So to give you some examples, we have in India one of the world's largest solar programs called the National Solar Mission. CEW, along with its research partners, was the first to evaluate and assess the progress of the National Solar Mission. Secondly, we are in the middle of what is called the 12th five-year plan. And this is the first time that the plan has been developed with widespread stakeholder consultation, and it is a sort of a vision charter for inclusive growth in the country. The CEW took the lead in writing the National Water Resources Framework study for the purposes of the 12th five-year plan, look at all aspects of water use in the country. Outside of India, we have helped other countries think about issues of finance to respond to climate change. We have brought hundreds of Indian institutions into contact with hundreds of US-based research institutions to help support a $100 million R&D facility on clean energy. We have worked on cooperation on water, say with Pakistan. We have created a partnership on sustainability between the state of Maharashtra in India and the province of Guangdong in China. So these are just some ideas of or examples of how our research has then helped to shape policy or engagement and cooperation both within and outside the country.
Sounds very interesting, Dr. Ghosh. You spoke about sustainability. Sustainability as a word has so many connotations right now and is used so liberally. What exactly sustainability means? What is your view on it?
It's a great question. You could spend the whole day debating it. But I think it's simply put, you need sustainability in terms of your economic progress. We need sustainability in terms of our social fabric. We can't be pursuing a particular type of growth that then undermines the unity of society. And thirdly, we need sustainability for the environment. But what are we really trying to sustain? And because I think the people I'm so-called speaking to right now in a virtual sense are the youth of India, think about it this way. If you're about a 20-year-old today, given current life expectancy, you're expected to live at least for another 70, 80 years. That's pretty much the end of the century. Now, would you like to be ending your time on the earth with looking outside your window and seeing many of the resources that you were familiar with when you were 20 years old don't exist anymore when you're 80, 85 years old? That is sustainability, in the sense that we want to grow, we want to prosper, but we also want to look after our future generations. And in a sense, we ourselves are a version of our future generations. And we've got to keep that in mind.
Dr. Ghosh, as you are aware, we are celebrating the 175th birth anniversary of J.N. Tata, and his vision was about sustainable development. His vision was about community development. How do you think corporates in this day and age can contribute towards it? What should be their role?
I think the primary lesson that we need to take from the legacy of the Tatas is that long before many of these issues, whether it is sustainable development or corporate social responsibility, etc., became part of our lexicon of daily use, companies were thinking about their work as part of operating within a community. And that is exactly what sustainable development has to be about. You can't divorce your activity, whether you're a corporation or you're an individual, from your impact on the rest of people or society around you. If we keep that core value in mind, that just gives us the direction in which we need to progress. So to come to your specific question, what should corporate entities today be thinking about? They need to be looking at their resource footprint, not just for the purposes of where their plant is located, but what does that mean for a farmer downstream, for their own employees' children who live nearby and might be inhaling that smoke, for the economic development of the country as a whole. Number two, they need to be thinking about what are the new business opportunities, what are the new technologies, new processes by which they can generate wealth, but also in a more sustainable manner. And a lot of work that CEW does tries to demonstrate the business case for sustainability. This is not charity. Sustainability is not something you think about when you're going to bed. It's what you've got to incorporate in your daily life. And number three, corporate entities, particularly in India, have to think about their global impact, because this is a growing economy. We are now the world's third or fourth largest economy, depending on how you calculate. Our companies, we're proud of our companies going outside of the country, buying up companies elsewhere. We are proud of their exports. We're proud of their investments. That means that the rest of the world is also going to be watching very carefully. We can't simply say, ExxonMobil in the US did something. We are now the ambassadors of India. It's not just our bureaucrats who represent the country, our companies represent the country. So if we as a society believe that we can take leadership on sustainability, it has to also start with how our corporate entities operate.
But how do you think India has done in the last 10 to 15 years when it comes to carbon footprint, when it comes to sustainable development? How does it fare vis-a-vis other countries of the world?
This is the ongoing debate. If you take the average Indian, the energy consumption of the average Indian is less than 1/10 of the energy consumption, or sometimes 1/15 or 1/20 of the energy consumption of an average citizen of the developed world. Now, the question is not that India therefore is a poor country and therefore it has no responsibility. The question is, there are many Indias within this one entity that we call our nation. And within that, some of us have very high footprints. We live in air-conditioned homes, we operate in air-conditioned offices, we drive cars, even if some of us take the metro. We are basically part of a global population that is consuming a lot of resources. And then there is another India, which is the aspirational India, the small town India, that might not today have that kind of footprint, but it wants that footprint. It wants to buy a car. it wants to have an air conditioner. It wants to have a refrigerator. Less than 10% of Indians currently own a refrigerator, for instance. And then there is an entire segment that is not even aspirational because even their basic needs have not been met of food, of clothing, of water, of energy. So we no longer are in a position to honestly put hand on heart and say, we have no responsibility. The rich of India and even the middle class of India cannot hide behind its poor. But as a country as a whole, our global footprint is far smaller than that of the rest of the developed world, far smaller than many other developing countries, particularly China. But that doesn't mean that in future our footprint will not grow. We have a very clear metric that our former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, laid out, that the per capita emissions of the average Indian will never exceed the average per capita emissions globally. But to make that vision a reality, we have to start acting now. We have to think about how do we reduce our footprint. We have to think about our business models. We have to think about new technologies. And of course, we have to think about our behavior.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, one side there is a government, then there are corporates, but everyone has to do their own bit. Dr. Ghosh, you are aware we are, this time the theme of the World Environment Day is the changing sea level and the climatic hazards related to that. What is your view on that?
You know, every few years, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change brings out an assessment of the science behind climate change. And over the last few months, the fifth assessment has been brought out, which keeps demonstrating with even greater certainty that the climate is changing and that human beings are largely responsible for it. So what does that mean? I'm right now in the Maldives, and this is a small island state. And I'm working here on decentralized renewable energy. This is a country that is threatened by sheer existential crisis. It might not even survive as a landmass in a few decades. So climate change is not only happening, it presents a real challenge to hundreds of millions of people across the world. In our own country, in India, we know that hundreds of millions of people live around the coastline. The small rises in the sea levels, for instance, over the course of the 20th century, sea levels have risen by about 20 centimeters on average. But the pace of rise has doubled in the last 20 years compared to the rest of the previous century. So that means we are threatening the way what we would consider our way of life. And that means we have to think about our urban design, we have to think about population concentrations, we have to think about where we situate our power plants, we have to think about where we build our ports, we've got to think about where we build our railway lines, we've got to think about national security, we have got to think about international migration that might result out of people driven away from places that are inundated by floods or are affected by droughts and so forth. So climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is a question for human civilization to answer. How do we want to live on this planet?
Is there any project or is there any research that CEW is doing in this particular area? Or is it working with any stakeholders right now?
There are a lot of different projects we are undertaking. Let me give you a few examples. We looked at Indian industry, which is a major emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, because we are a developing country and we need manufacturing, we need industry. So I'm not at all suggesting that we don't have those industries. We focused on one sector, cement. Why cement? Because we know we are a rapidly urbanizing country. So one estimate suggests that 80% of buildings that will exist in India in 20 years' time haven't yet been built. And you don't build buildings out of anything, but you build them out of cement. So the cement industry is going to be a major player in driving the sort of urbanization and urban design that we have in India. The cement industry also accounts for 7% of India's emissions. So we asked ourselves, is there a way for the cement industry to grow, prosper, make profits, and also reduce emissions? So we looked at every single cement plant in the country, and we analyzed whether it's an old plant, a new plant, somewhere in the middle. We looked at what their emissions were, and then we modeled new technological interventions. Take, for instance, we generate a lot of urban waste, our municipal solid waste. Instead of using coal to fire up cement plants, we said, can we use municipal solid waste to fire up cement plants? And plant by plant, we demonstrated that you can actually reduce emissions and make money in the process because your energy costs go down. Let me give you another example from a different part. We are in the process of building a new institution that CW and some partner institutions are sort of giving birth to, called CLEAN. So the Clean Energy Access Network. And the purpose of CLEAN is to help entrepreneurs that deliver energy access solutions to the rural poor or to the urban poor and help them scale up their businesses by providing training, by helping test their technologies and giving them certifications, by helping them design better financial instruments. CW identified that in India, there were 250 plus companies operating purely in decentralized energy. He said that is tremendous. That demonstrates the entrepreneurial zeal of the country. It demonstrates that entrepreneurs today are identifying real social problems and trying to solve them through sustainable business models, and they need support. So we've created this organization, the design of this organization, that would help do that. So these are ways in which you can work with big industry, you can work with really tiny enterprises, but all of this is to demonstrate that there's a business case for sustainability. It's not charity, you can make money, you can be sustainable, and you can solve social problems.
It's interesting to talk about entrepreneurship. There are so many viewers of ours right now who must be watching this and would trying to understand if they have to do something in here and if they have to learn about sustainability and if they have to learn about technology which actually promotes sustainable development, where do they go? How do they go about it? What would be your advice to them?
You know, it depends. If you are a student today, you could, if you choose to say go into engineering, you could choose what kind of engineering field you take up. So if you're a mechanical engineer, you could then think of working with a solar company to help design better solar panels. If you're a civil engineer, you could think about better design of irrigation channels or better building designs that reduce the carbon footprint or the energy consumption of a building. But if you were, say, a social scientist, like me, originally trained as an economist and then I was a political scientist, you need to look at the economics of sustainability. All these claims I'm making is not my opinion, it's based on our research, but we need a lot more work in this area. If you were a sociologist, you should be working with communities to understand how do they perceive the lack of energy, the absence of clean water. You can't go and tell them stop consuming energy because you're going to save the planet. So how would you work with communities? Only a sociologist will be able to understand. For instance, CW over the next few months is going to be undertaking surveys of more than 10,000 households in rural areas just to understand these perceptions. If you were an anthropologist, you could try and understand how do organizations and communities and tribes work, what makes them click, what doesn't, what kind of rules, norms shape their behavior. If you were, so all this is in the realm of your kind of formal academia. But if you were just a lay citizen, working in a telecoms company or something, of course you got to pursue your career. You're not going to give it up. What could you do? You got to make some clear choices. Do you want to drive in a hulking SUV? Yes, it looks interesting, it looks big, you can ram your way through the road. Or do you want to drive in a more fuel efficient vehicle? Or do you want to take the metro? You can decide whether you change your light bulbs to CFL or LED, or you continue with incandescent light bulbs at your home. You can decide whether you use water sustainably. I'm not talking about just turning off the taps, and I'm talking about actually thinking about your real water footprint. So every time you are gardening your garden, or you're irrigating your garden, or you're putting water in your flower pots, are you using clean water? Are you using recycled water? These are individual decisions we can take within our households. So we've got to go beyond just switching off the light and turning off the fan or turning off the tap. We've got to take a little bit more of an effort. But for that, we've got to think, what is my impact? That's why I went back earlier to what I was saying. Industry, government, civil society, and individuals, each one of us has to think, what is my impact on the rest of the community?
Absolutely, absolutely. We agree with you. Now, just moving slightly away from the subject and just talking about you. Looking back all these years, what inspired you to take up environment and and get into this particular area? What was the inspiration in your life?
Well, I mean, my work has been in public policy for more than a decade. I've worked on many different areas. I've worked on technology, trade, access to medicines, conflict and development, and so forth. But about a decade ago, I was writing the UN Human Development Report on water. I was one of the co-authors. And as part of that, I shot a documentary along with the hip-hop star Jay-Z on water. And this we were filming in Southern Africa. And I remember in one case, I took Jay-Z along to a village in rural South Africa. And we went to the primary school in the village. And the primary school was on top of a hill. So a beautiful location. But when the school break happened, a bunch of 5 girls who were about 12 years old or so were not playing in the playground of the school. They took buckets and they started walking down the hill. So I followed after them. And as we walked down, we reached a sort of a pond from where we know that at different times of the day, wild animals also came to drink. That was the water they collected, put it on their heads. So I tried putting a bucket on my head, and I can tell you it's not easy. And these are 12-year-old girls who are doing it. And then they have to walk up the hill again. And while we were walking up the hill, we come across literally 2 feet away a snake called the black mamba, I think. And it's the fastest striking poisonous snake, venomous snake in Africa. And it was lying 2 feet away. The only reason it did not strike us is because its belly was distended. It had already swallowed a rat just a few minutes ago. But it demonstrates, I hope I can visualize for you, the real pressure that something as basic as having water to drink has on school-going girls or on communities in rural areas. And that struck me. I said, all the research that we're doing ultimately has to solve problems. And to me, that was one of the motivations to try and come back to India and help set up the Council on Energy, Environment and Water as a research institution that would be focused on delivering real solutions, not research just for researchers' sake. But I think there's a lot of work that has to be done. We are just a small cog in the wheel, but it demonstrates at least one of the key factors that made me think a little bit differently from what I was doing earlier.
So when you're not worrying about environment, what does that interest you? What are your hobbies?
I like to cook a lot. I went to the New York School of Culinary Excellence, trained as a baker. So when I get time, I like to bake cakes and desserts. Before my daughter is 1.5 years old. But before she was born, I was part of two choirs in Delhi. One was Nimrana Music Foundation, which sings opera, which puts out opera performances, and another was the Delhi Chamber Choir. And of late, I run a lot. I run 5 miles every day. So those are ways in which I kind of keep myself occupied.
Very health conscious. So are your daughters also very passionate about environment?
Well, this is about the sustainability of future generation, right? So he likes to play with water, so I make sure that that gets recycled.
All right. Dr. Ghosh, very important question in this day and age right now. What are the values you think the youth of today should possess? In what right direction they should be looking at? What is your suggestion to them?
I don't want to sound like a grandfather because I'm not. I do consider myself part of India's youth. I think when you talk about things like values, certain values don't change. What is right, what is wrong, we all know. But if I reflect on our own generation, because we are actually quite fortunate to be living at what I call the sort of cusp of India's development. Our parents and our grandparents went through the independence movement or the early stages of India's development. We are now at a cusp where we're both poor, rich, emerging power, everything all rolled together into one. And I would say there are three values that we should try and aspire to. One is integrity. It's easy to make a quick buck. It has probably become easier. And no matter how much we talk about corruption in general, etc., integrity is something that comes from within. You can't have a policeman standing next to every single citizen. And the integrity with which we do our work, with which we assume our responsibilities and execute on them, is something that applies across any stream. You don't have to be a social activist to be having integrity. Number two is empathy. We've got to understand, as I was saying earlier, what our impact is on our wider society. We've got to understand things from other people's perspectives a little bit more. This is not just the fact that you care about, say, your maid or something like that. That of course applies, but we've got to think about the world as a whole. India is fortunate that so many of us speak English. We speak the global language. That means we do have opportunities for engaging with the rest of the world. We have always been an open culture, inviting people to our land. We should be all equally engaging with the rest of the world, but for that we need empathy. We need to understand where people are coming from, what their positions are. I think that will help us engage better. On a pure day-to-day work, it will help you with engaging with clients, etc. And a third value, I would say, which is not always easy, is to develop some sort of vision. What is it that you would like to be doing with your life? Not just one's career, but what kind of impact do you want to leave? And again, that does not mean we have to enter charities or things like that. We can run our lives as we are, but with some greater vision. We've got to become problem solvers. We've got to try and pick on things and say, I've got this skill, my friend has another skill, what can we come together and deliver? Otherwise, it's just too easy to get into a job, make the money, go to a mall, watch the movie, and carry on. So each one will have a different vision. That doesn't matter. But if we work with integrity, if we have empathy for others, then I think even the vision will emerge. And I think these are core values that are more important now than they might have been a few decades earlier, when it was more about nation building, industrial development, what you're doing for your country, and so forth. So the values have evolved a little bit, and I think these should be the values of our generation.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Ghosh. Any last message to our audience on the occasion of World Environment Day? Anything that you would like to add?
Last message should be that only 5th of June should not be World Environment Day. Only one day should not be Mother's Day. Only one day should not be Women's Day. These are core things that matter to us, and let's try and integrate this into our day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks for your time today. I'm sure our audience has a lot to learn from this conversation. And you're absolutely right. We all need to make those small or take those small steps which will make the huge difference at the end of it. Thanks a lot again for joining us.
Thanks a lot.